About one of the most interesting phenomenon in the Russian Far East. I often tell you about various stories from the Far East, the territory of Russia that's close to China, full of dense forest, minerals, and many interesting stories and legends. This one has to do about the so-called giant serpents. There have been numerous sightings of rather strange creatures in the area known in Russia as Primoria, Primorsky Krai or Maritime Province. It's a far eastern province of Russia on the border of China. Centuries ago, when Russian explorers began conquest of the vast territories, their accounts of encounters with the giant serpents drifted westward to Moscow. And when the Great Schism of the 18th century sent countless fleeing Staroveri into the taiga wilderness, these dissidents encountered giant serpents in the impenetrable forests. Staroveri are adherents of the old faith, and there was a problem between them and the Russian Orthodox Church. The Staroveri settlements have stayed hidden for centuries. I know my father told me stories about the strange villages that had been discovered in the taiga, dense forest regions of Siberia and the Far East. He had served in the Soviet armed forces in that area in the 1950s. But I believe even a few years ago, a village or two were discovered that was away from the civilization for maybe 100 years or more. In 1991, Vladimir Kuznetsov was 71 years old. He was a seasoned taiga hunter, well experienced, and as a young man in the years prior to World War II, he came upon a hidden Staroveri settlement in the taiga. The sun was about to set. Kuznetsov was looking for a place to spend the night. Suddenly, behind some trees, he saw a glimpse of what looked like a bonfire, and he heard loud singing. So he approached cautiously, and what he saw was a clearing with a bonfire and a semicircle of people. The people who surrounded the fire sang unfamiliar songs. The hunter could not make out the words, but he was afraid to come any closer. As the people sang, they bowed in the direction of the setting sun, performing incomprehensible gestures with their hands. Kuznetsov was able to see everything happening in the clearing quite well, regardless of the sunset. Suddenly, from the direction of the setting sun, from behind the trees, something large and dark crawled out into the clearing. Kuznetsov observed it for a short time until he understood that it was a snake. But what a large snake. He estimated that the snake was about 10 meters long. At the time, my colleague, a well-known Far Eastern Russian explorer and writer, Alexander Rempel, interviewed Kuznetsov. But at that time, the old taiga hunter was no longer certain whether the creature had paws. But according to the hunter, at the time he was looking at the snake, he could see paws. Actually, he made out 2 forepaws, but was not at all certain about the hind paws. The people were singing much louder by then in guttural voices. The hunter became very afraid, turned around, and ran through the forest, not seeing the trail. He did not recall how long he ran, but his hands and face were full of deep scratches. When the darkness descended, he found a pine tree to sit under, and there he spent the night, awake and scared. Kuznetsov thought that he was a witness to some rite of the Staroveri, but the Russian taiga dwellers know that the Staroveri have no such rites. Local pagans, however, did have similar ritual rites. Such rites included a performance by so-called summoned creatures. The role was performed either by stuffed animals or maskers or masked men. The magicians among the Far Eastern taiga pagans possessed an ability to exert sound influence, an uncanny ability to instill fear. or it could be infrasound. And I'll talk about infrasound in another presentation of mine about the Ural Mountains. But getting back to the giant serpents, Природа и аномальные явления newspaper in the Maritime province published a story told by another hunter. It was published back in 1991 in Vladivostok. What happened is that in the 1940s, after the war, this hunter went hunting in the vicinity of the Huntami Lake. At a nearby mountain pass in the oak wood thickets, among tree branches, he saw a gigantic snake. It was of dark color, about 10 meters long. The snake exhibited no outward aggressiveness. It simply quietly rested, nestled in the branches. The man aimed his Birdan rifle at it and fired. After the shots hit it, the snake jerked its huge body wriggling in pain, easily breaking off the tree branches. That show of monstrous strength scared the hunter, and he ran towards a nearby settlement. He and his sons, armed with heavy rifles, came back to the place where the snake had been peacefully resting before, but found only broken branches, small crushed trees, and trampled down grass. Natives of the northern regions of the Maritime province told Alexander Rempel stories of giant serpents that have reappeared in the vicinity of the Anga River. That's in the Irkutsk region, and the river flows into the Baikal Lake. One of them, Rybalko, in 1978, saw a serpent that was about 5 meters long, and its body diameter was approximately 10 centimeters. In 1983, Alexander Vodyanin, along with his co-workers at the hay mowing project, saw a gigantic snake about 10 meters in length. In 1984, coal miners of the Nikolaevsky mines, on their way to work, sighted a snake of enormous proportions. The serpent was crossing the road, and at first the coal miners, who were riding in a bus, mistook it for a black log. Then they had a closer look, and it was a gigantic snake. My colleagues at the former Vladivostok Association of Ufologists have been receiving letters that told of encounters with giant serpents. Does it, or rather they, snakes like that or serpents exist? My colleagues hope to answer the question after their expedition to the Tony Lake. Why that particular one? After they heard Kuznetsov's story, my colleagues started looking for more information and learned of the Udeigan legend, local people. The legend had it that a mysterious animal inhabits the lake, as well as the lakes along the stream of the Samarga River, a tributary of the Dagda. The creature of the legend is a giant serpent that dwells in the deep burrows underground. Arseniev was a famous Russian explorer of Siberia and the Far East, and Americans and others Japanese should know him from a Japanese Russian-Japanese movie called Dersu Urzala. Arseniev also mentioned an animal that lived in the Far East and looked like a crocodile. Anatoly Komandigu related the following story. In the twilight hours, 3 hunters started a big bonfire and sat down with their backs towards a small, snow-covered hill. As the fire flared up, warmth spread out, and the men felt how the hill behind their backs started moving. They turned around. It was a huge animal of gray and black colors, covered with large scale like plates, with a thick long tail and small short legs. The hunters, overcome by fear, dropped their rifles and equipment and fled. They did return after 3 days. All they found was their abandoned equipment and remains of some burned animal. The question is there a breed of giant serpents in the Russian taiga? My colleagues tried to find out. And they wanted to shoot it, but not with bullets. They wanted to take pictures of it if they would see the giant serpent. But years went by. Russian situation wasn't that easy, economical, and there was no money for the expeditions. But taiga wasn't the only area where the serpents have been sighted in the Russian territories. I've spoken about the Kuril Islands and will continue to do so. And I need to mention that back in 1953, in the area of the Kunashir Island, that's the South Kuril Islands, he and the crew of his ship sighted a large sea serpent, which was swimming not far away from the ship at quite a large velocity. And then the animal put his head underneath the water and disappeared without making any splashes. It had a long neck. There was another case in the Kuril Islands when Litvinenko, who was in the Soviet Navy, in 1955, together with the crew of sailors, observed a gigantic snake whose head was as big as a large watermelon, and it was located about 4 meters above the water. They calculated that the length of the animal was about 25 meters. And in the northern Soviet Union, in the Arctic, in 1959, in the Barents Sea, the crew of the ship SKR-55, with under the command of Captain Lezov, had sighted gigantic sea serpent more than once. And also outside of the Soviet Union, there was an interesting case when the whaling floating base Sovetskaya Rossiya had aboard a TASS journalist Izbenko, who sent a telegram saying that there was in the Indian Ocean there was a sighting twice of the gigantic sea animals which look like the sea serpents, about 10 to 15 meters long, and he was able to see them from the aboard the helicopter. These serpents very calmly were lying on the surface of the sea, and the pilot of the helicopter, Ivan Juice, when he saw one of the animals, he descended down below, and they could see that the sea serpent had a very interesting bright brownish color, and the thickness of his body reached almost a meter. They visually determined that the length was about 15 meters, and this took place in 1968. So what are those strange animals? And have there been other sightings? We are sure. The situation with the Far East is that there aren't that many populated areas, and the taiga is basically same hard to reach area. Of course, it's full of gold, ginseng, and other wonders of this planet. And one day I'll tell you more stories about the legends of the natives of the taiga, and also about the hunt for the ginseng, the story of the so-called flying man of the Far East, and other very interesting phenomena. Thank you.